Security is critical, but let's be real. Compliance, if leveraged correctly, gets the budget approved. CISOs who fight compliance end up underfunded. But CISOs who know how to use compliance as a tool, they get the resources they need. Today, we're breaking down how to turn compliance into a strategic advantage, winning budget, board buy-in, and real security improvements. Let's get into it. So, a couple things, right? I think, I shared this, I think, in a previous episode. Like, any leadership role, you have to put aside your personal bias for any scenario and do the right thing for the organization and have clarity of thought. And when I look back and reflect upon my successes, obviously the team plays a huge role in it, but my thought process around how do we get things done and what was the kind of the force function, or what was the driver that pushed certain initiatives through and others struggled a bit. And I came to a conclusion, and I think most folks would probably see this theme play out, that compliance, or the use of compliance to drive security initiatives, can be a very successful and fruitful one. And so I'll talk a little bit about why and some ways to think about it. So number one is, when you think about compliance, immediately as a CISO, you should be thinking about business continuity, right? So imagine you're doing business in a hospital and you no longer are HIPAA compliant. What happens, right? Imagine if you're processing credit card information and you fail a PCI audit. So that has a direct impact to the business. And so when you think about compliance, that lens of this is business continuity, not always business continuity in terms of, hey, the systems are down, how can we bring them back up, right? But this is a real tangible thing that you can hang your hat on, and you should be thinking about and using it. I wouldn't say to your advantage, but using it as the way you think about how to position initiatives. So compliance equals business continuity. Okay, so let's go a little further. Not only does compliance enable or create business continuity, but it also, compliance also is a business enabler. We just talked about HIPAA and the failure, what that means for a potential hospital. But imagine if you're selling a product and you no longer have an ISO certification, or SOC 2 is now in jeopardy of not being, recertified. What happens? I mean, how happy will your customers be, right? So that's where the conversation from a CISO's perspective needs to be strategic, and not only just the continuity piece of it, okay, but the enablement. We are enabling the business now, okay? And then the other, just two other points that I would highlight would be, when you enable some security functionality, I've seen folks do a poor job in highlighting the tangible ROI, right? We enabled zero trust. Okay, we all know zero trust has a security impact, a risk reduction, but quantify that numerically for me. Folks struggle with that because, we all agree that it has some impact, but right? If you don't pass compliance, there are tangible ROI that will be impacted, right? For example, fines, lawsuits, loss of trust. You and I can sit here and do simple back of the napkin math and come up with a fairly, I think, a general idea of what a potential fine would be if data is breached and the customer list is exposed. You and I can look at historical fines that have been levied against organization A, B, and C for some security deficiencies. That's something that you and I can do relatively easy, and I don't think we would get much questioning from folks to say, yeah, that's about right. So compliance has a tangible ROI to this, and so that's another strategic way to think about compliance. And then you share this at the beginning of this segment. Security itself is hard to sell. People agree that we need it, and the term gets thrown out. It's a cost center. It's a cost center. Well, that alone, if someone views a function as a cost center, right? Now, how do you change that narrative, right? And so selling it security alone without the compliance piece, I'm not arguing that you can't do it. I'm just saying that if you use a different approach strategically, compliance can make that runway a lot easier to move down. And so that's why I believe that this used strategically, you can and should and will yield very, very good results for a CISO.
And I think about it from the scenario too of, compliance to get your foot in the door, but compliance doesn't equal security, because there's plenty of people that are, ISO certified, HIPAA compliant. I mean, the healthcare industry, unfortunately, third-party breaches, supply chain attacks. I mean, you can be compliant and still suffer a breach. One does not take away the other, but one at the very least is giving some baseline of rules of saying you need to have at least these things, these risks identified and taken care of, and hopefully in a way that you've got the protective, the detective, the corrective, and you've got a no single point of failure through that path to say that if one of these things fails, that, okay, here's where your problems are going to exist. So, it's a scenario where it's almost unfortunate that compliance does need to drive security. But at the very least, it gives us a common language to use to say, okay, we have to do this, right? And I really like one of the things that you pointed out, which is how compliance is a revenue enabler. Think about all of the products and services that people are pushing out, and if you don't have that trust page, or if you don't have, here's my SOC 1, here's my SOC 2, here's my ISO, here's my PCI, here's my HIPAA or high trust, whatever the case may be, you've got, depending on the landscape in which that you operate in, that could, for all intents and purposes, be a non-starter for a lot of organizations coming in to partner or purchase your business.
No, 100%. And it gives a common vernacular too, right? So if I say to you, and again, compliance doesn't equal security. No one segment equals any, like an authentication system doesn't equal an application, right? You have multiple pieces of it. So, but compliance is an important part of the overall security program. And so this notion, and I get this a lot, well, it's compliance is the bare minimum. Yes, you have to start somewhere, right? And you have to build momentum somehow. And so I'm not arguing that compliance in itself is the end-all, be-all. That's not the point. The point being is that strategically as a CISO, you have to think about, I would argue and I would share and I would teach and mentor any aspiring CISO or any aspiring leader that use this strategically. And these are ways to think about it. There could be other ways. These right there, but no one. But and the statement isn't that compliance is the end all be all, right? It's just one piece of the bigger puzzle, but it's the door that unlocks a lot of conversations and revenue. Budgets to get things done, and that's the way we should think about it and strategically use it.
And if it's not strategically used, let's talk about how you can use that compliance strategically, which we're covering a little bit, but how could potentially a CISO become trapped by it?
Yeah. So again, and this is where I think the CISO has to take thought leadership, right? And really transform the narrative around the messaging that's used, right? And so, let's just talk through some scenarios, and I will highlight some here, and I'd love to get kind of your thoughts on it. So, the number one thing, okay, map security initiatives to compliance mandates, right? So, general statement: security initiatives to compliance mandates. Now, if I were to say to you, "Hey, we want to deploy a new EDR," right? Just a security perspective alone, that. Now, versus if I say to you, to meet PCI, ISO 27, or SOC 2 compliance mandates, where there's a requirement for an endpoint security solution, we need to implement EDR. The second conversation is framed, or statement is framed in such a way that you're leading with the compliance piece, but you're still achieving the security outcome that you wanted, versus, hey, we need an EDR. Right, so let's continue down that path. We want to implement a security awareness training program. Okay. Now, some may have their opinions on how effective they are, etc., or if the business is going through maybe light revenue or a bad quarter, they may say, "Look, we don't want to prioritize." But if we were to say SOC 2, ISO require this, and therefore we have to implement it, that conversation becomes a lot easier. Okay, zero trust implementation. Again, that's a security. If I go at it as security alone versus GDPR versus HIPAA, okay, this is a compliance requirement. Therefore, the conversation should be shaped in that way, and you will get a lot. I think the buy-in and the ability to tangibly see the ROI and the investment and what it yields becomes a lot easier. Right? Okay. So that's number one.
And I would say before getting into the second piece, it's not only to map the security initiative from inception in support, but continuity and maturity, perhaps. Because if any one of these controls falls away, or any one of these strategies, better word than control, security strategy falls down, not supported, doesn't work, and you've got a client base, or you have third parties or contractual obligations, and they come out and this report comes and says, hey, we've got a material finding, or we have a opinion, essentially, that would mean a bad check on that report that you're getting, a qualified opinion, that now you've got a scenario where you used to only have to answer to one. Now you've got to answer to everybody. So, it's a function too of, leveraging it. And I wanted to double down on that just from a continuation perspective, because if you take away without compensation, you're left in, at least for those that have a good scrutinizing eye, doesn't need to be strong. You're going to be up for, quite a bit of overhead associated with it. But carry on, Aftab.
Sure. So just continuing, like the second point that I'll highlight is, I think it's okay, and I think it's justified to use compliance contingencies to put a sense of urgency on the organization as well. It's one thing to get the budget approved, but if it's, well, we'll do this next year, we're planning a little better, we'll do it next year. It's okay to say we're going to fail audit. This could be a finding, and it could be potentially a failure this year, so we can use it to build a sense of urgency. And then again, it's a skill to learn to translate compliance risks into business risk. So learning how to do that and being good at it. I mean, even standing in front of a mirror practicing wouldn't be a bad idea, but really having that framework in your mind around how do I translate what I need with a compliance lens to it, right? So for example, if you want to sell a logging investment internally, it's very easy to say we need to improve logging and retention to better our threat detection, right? Or we can frame that differently and say, like, without logging, we won't meet a SOC 2 requirement, which then will put certain number of dollars of customer contracts at risk. And that, again, it's a skill that CISOs should practice and be mindful of how to strategically leverage it, right? And then the other part that I actually like this a lot is that, my previous firm, we used this to our advantage, but looking at compliance as awards or trophies in the trophy case and highlighting that to be competitive in the market, like being at the forefront of the marketing material to highlight that, hey, company X is serious about security. We have X number of certifications, using that to drive more revenue. And so that's another portion or piece that I would highlight.
Yeah, big time. Especially when you've got, if you have a sales leader or a chief revenue officer or somebody in your organization that is responsible for, that P&L of selling the product, selling the service, they don't like saying no on those RFPs and no on those security questionnaires that come across. That's a good partner to have when you start thinking about that, competitive and market pressure that comes into play, because that does separate, the competition out there big time.
And this is where measuring that is important. You can't be stuck in your vacuum in your team, but working with the security organizations to see like, hey, how many deals were impacted by this? The security teams may not necessarily track that metric, but it's something that the sales teams may not track that metric, but it's definitely a place where the CISO or the security org should have visibility and track it, because then you can quantify missed opportunities or missed at-bats because you're deficient in some certification. So being very strategic about it is very important. Okay, cool, Scott. All right, man, let's move on to the next segment. If you want to kick that off for us.
CISOs don't always get the budget they need, but the ones who know how to frame security needs through compliance, they tend to get what they ask for. I'm going to give Aftab 3 different real-world budget requests. He'll have to reframe the request using compliance as a driver. Let's see how it's done. All right, hot seat time, my friend. Okay. Our current antivirus isn't cutting it. Attackers are getting in through endpoints, and we're struggling to detect lateral movement fast enough. We need $300,000 for a next-gen EDR solution to reduce dwell time and contain threats before they spread.
Wow. Okay, I have to frame this from a compliance lens, right? Okay, so it'd be easier to just say it like that. We need $300K for EDR, but I think again we had just talked about this, like leveraging. So, for example, possible way to think about it was like NIST 800 and 171 ISO 2700 requires effective threat detection and response capability on the endpoint. Therefore, we need to make this investment to adhere to that requirement for us. And our current solution is not meeting the standard. That conversation now becomes, centralized around some compliant deficiencies. It aligns with the security outcome that we want, that we need a next generation EDR. But it does put the business at the forefront and making that decisions through that lens. So that's the way I would frame it.
Well done. You ready for number 2?
Not really, but let's do it.
We have over 400 vendors with access to sensitive data, and our manual risk assessments are inconsistent. We need $250,000 for an automated third-party risk management solution that continuously monitors vendor security postures. How do you do it?
Okay, so I've dealt with this, so I have some personal scar tissue with this, and telling the business that our folks are literally swamped with these reviews does not work. So this one has to be done through a compliance lens. So talking about GDPR and CCPA have mandates that required documented risk assessment and oversight of third-party vendors who handle personal data. So now we've taken the crux of this is these audits or these reviews require manpower and require some system to keep it all together. But compliance gives us an easy out. The compliance framework or requirements gives us an easy out here, because they literally are saying that you need to have a system in place with this documented, and you need to be able to share the reviews during audit time. And so this one is relatively easy, I'd say. GDPR, CCPA require it. We need to have this documented risk. This is where the investment will go to ensure that we will not be in a shortcoming state when it comes to this control.
All right. So far you have acquired $550K budget. So here we're going to keep going. Our cloud environment is growing faster than we can secure it. Misconfigurations are leading to open S3 buckets and excessive IAM permissions. We need $200,000 for a CSPM tool to continuously monitor and enforce security policies in AWS and Azure.
So SOC 2 and HIPAA require it. So I think you start the conversation with that, and also you had highlighted AWS and Azure, and so in order to meet some of the compliance requirements, we need to have continuous monitoring, and being that it's a multi-cloud environment, what puts our auditability at risk. So that's that's the way we would frame the conversation, specifically around SOC 2 and HIPAA, and obviously depending on the business itself. But again, the security outcome is we need a monitoring tool, but we're again mapping that to our compliance requirements and leading with that. So that's a very easy, easy framework to do. We need something. Okay, go look at the compliance piece and where we can find where it's going to provide us a good story to tell, and then execute on that. And so I think that's the way I would present it. And now, if you're on the other side, CFO or CISO, CEO, okay, again, yet another compliance deficiency that could impact all the things that we highlighted the business. I think this is an easy one. All right, man, that was tough, Scott. I'm done sitting in the hot seat, man. We got to trade seats here, man. So let's move on and make something easier, because 3 out of 3 for me. It's so let's move on to the next segment. I'm cooked, man. Can't give away all my trade secrets, man.
Compliance isn't just about passing audits. It's about protecting your business. And the best security teams know that real compliance starts with real security. That's why top CISOs trust Varonis to keep their data protected, their threats detected, and their risks under control. No more blind spots and no more last-minute fire drills before an audit. Just automated security that keeps you compliant and ahead of the game. Go to Varonis.com and book a demo today.
In this segment, we're playing Trust or Bust. We'll go back and forth with a prompt about compliance. We'll say trust if we like it, or bust if we don't. Let's get into it.
All right, first up, compliance should focus on security outcomes, not prescriptive controls. Trust or bust?
Trust. The shift toward outcomes driven compliance is the right path. But most frameworks are disjointed, right? A mix of controls, and so the results vary, the approaches vary. So it's tough, but I do trust this. This is the right approach. Okay, up next, biometric authentication should be mandated compliance standard for sensitive data access. Trust or bust?
I'm going to say bust. I'm all about putting controls in front of sensitive data. Specifically, I think about application to application controls, human to data controls, multi-factor authentication. Absolutely. If that multi-factor has some position of bio in it, that's fantastic. Across the board, we also have to, continue to evolve in the space of getting to a position of having, the right set of privileges, practical set of least privilege, monitoring that data. If you've got compensating controls, I think potentially here, biometric authentication for every single data access, position or authentication or change, whatever the case may be, might hamper the business more than help it. And it could also have bigger issues down the road when it comes down to other things that a security leader is attempting to get into the environment. So I'm going to say bust there.
Okay.
All right, next one. Non-compliance fines should scale based on the number of users affected. Trust or bust?
Trust. Fines should be scaled based on impact, but they must also factor in risk, negligence, financial ability to ensure fairness, or the small guy isn't getting screwed, so to speak. So affected user as a one characteristic I struggle with, but in principle, I do trust this. I'm okay with this. All right. Okay, cool. Last one, Scott. If a vendor causes a data breach, they should be forced to pay regulatory fines on behalf of their clients. Trust or bust?
He throws some doozies at me, man. I'm going to say, I'm going to say trust. Even this is part of where cybersecurity insurance, class action lawsuits that come in on the back end, the fines, what have you. But contractual obligation, I honestly think it's responsibility that comes to, almost to what you were just talking about. Where did potential risk and negligence come into play, financial ability, but quite frankly, they should have some skin in the game for having to pay.
Fair enough. All right.
Every company has a compliance nightmare lurking under the surface. In this next segment, we're stepping into the shoes of the CISOs at a couple of legendary brands. What's the one compliance risk that would keep us up at night if we were the CISOs at these companies? Let's find out. All right, Aftab, if you were the CISO at Tesla, what compliance nightmare would keep you up at night?
Tesla collects a lot of data, and so I would be very worried about how we're protecting this data. Is it identifiable? So that would be relatively stressful for me to think about the volume, and some of it's very sensitive data, right? Like where people are going, have cameras inside the car. Like what are we doing with that? Who has access to it? So that would be first. Given the fact that Tesla has identified itself as an AI company, the regulatory landscape in AI is very volatile. So ensuring that we follow it very closely and, if possible, somehow have a way to influence it, would be an area that I would also be very, very much concerned about, and would want to have a really clear idea of how all the different scenarios that the regulatory frameworks can go, and we're prepared to action upon it in a short amount of time. The other portion, just a couple other things that I would highlight is that, because Tesla's cars, and I'm talking the car specifically here, and they moved, I think, to version 12 of their self-driving. They moved to a full neural network to make the driving decisions, and so you always worry about if one bad decision, or one, I wouldn't say error, but a decision that could be catastrophic, and you have folks' lives at risk. So I wouldn't say understanding, but having, we always talk about like AI bias, and making sure that we have very clear guardrails around, what decision this neural network is making for the scenario in which the driver is in, would be something that I would keep me up at night. And then the last piece of it is that we talk about logging. We talk about user data, but also logging. Specifically around what we're collecting, how we're using it, who has access to it. That would be an area that would keep me up at night as well. Yeah, so those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. But I think, this would be a role that would have probably more challenges, not just the ones that I've highlighted, because they, because you still, we haven't even talked much about, the solar and their solar business, their battery packs. So there's a whole host of other areas and I don't know enough of the business to then say like, well, there's some areas of security that would concern me there. Okay. All right, Scott. So now your turn, man. So if you were to CISO of Apple, what compliance nightmare would keep you up at night?
I mean, I'd make so much money, I'd be sleeping really good at night now. So I would think, for one of the things that steps out to me is you recall that, what was it, a few years back when there was a phone intercepted. I can't remember what the subject, I don't know if it was a terrorist or something along those lines, right? And they were trying to get into the phone. And Apple had the ability to secret key, get our government into somebody's phone. It was like an insider threat, something like that. But in that type of trust scenario would be pretty significant as far as how do you navigate that, not just in this country, but in other countries. I would also think about, Apple, if you really consider, right, they're a giant payment network, right? You're using your phone and double clicking, using your face, and you're, doing all this stuff and massive transactions. And now you've got Apple Pay, which, can hold a tremendous amount of dollars in it. There is not a small regulatory requirement in the world of payments. Being able to manage that at scale, thinking about how that impact on global payments specifically, it's a world that I came from is not a very small feat to, have the systems and the processes in place and then throw in the privacy requirements that surround that. You're collecting a ton of data, hopefully, anonymizing it, something along those lines that you're not mapping data subjects across the board all over the place. But I would assume that they just have a tremendous amount of PII for organizations, their sub-organizations, employees and customers, the products that they have to source from their countries and how that is being impacted by, some of the, trade laws and what have you. I would assume that the compliance requirements of an Apple have a pretty substantial team, a lot of legal strategy behind it. I would assume and hope some pretty airtight segmentation of where data resides, where it can be stored, where it can be processed, where it can be accessed, but making sure too, from the scenario that exists of there just being such a global domination, recognizable name, the state actors that are after that data that they know that Apple has, puts a lot of urgency on compliance and those security outcomes that need to hit. So those would be, some of the few, but when it comes down to it, it's the data that they have and how that would have to be protected, whether it's, data subjects, PII, payment data, any of the health stuff that they've got, the bio stuff that they have. I mean, it's tremendous.
Did you know more people consume podcasts on YouTube than any other platform? Well, if you're one of these people, you're in luck. The CISO Circle is on YouTube. Just search the CISO Circle, subscribe to the show, and make sure to tap the notification bell so YouTube can let you know when each episode drops. All right, let's get into it. I don't know. I have no understanding of our system. So this is coming out of just complete guess here, but I'd be surprised if a municipality has their stoplight systems even connected. Right? I mean,
but if you tap into one of these local, junction points, I mean, have you ever seen, even think about the context of this? All right. So you're going through your traffic lights in any intersection USA, and you see when things go wrong, and you've got, potentially a police officer that goes in there, cracks open the box, and they're controlling the lights. I've seen that before.
Yeah.
Now, okay, if that can happen, and somebody could flip a switch. It's an electrical system nonetheless. I don't think that anyone's getting in there like, hey, we came in through like a multi-path way through we started with the internet here, but there's some possibility here. I don't know, but it seemed pretty realistic. Maybe hasn't happened. Thankfully, movie was good. Quality was good.
Okay, I made a statement. I do believe that there is one traffic light in America that is connected, and there's this one traffic light by where I live, and I swear to you, Scott, at 10 o'clock, if I come home after 10, they have a video there, and they're watching me, and they just want to mess with me. I was sitting at this red light, and no one's there. It's me, and I'm thinking. Every time I'm thinking there's got to be someone here, just in some interns sitting in some room laughing, watching me frustrated at this darn light because it's red and it stays red forever. I think that one light is connected. All the other ones, I don't know. But this one, dude, it is so... oh man. And I know that if they're watching me and they're laughing, because sitting in the car just frustrated, and it's always after a certain hour. I think that's the one camera, that's the one intersection and light combination that's probably connected. But Going back to what you're saying.
If Marky Mark is sitting around the corner, he might be controlling that thing, man. You never know.
Yeah, I don't have any gold. I don't have any gold in my car. So I mean,
Well, that's a wrap on season 2 of the CISO Circle. We're grateful to every one of you who tuned in, and we're already hard at work on season 3. If you have feedback on what you loved or even what you didn't, we'd love to hear it. Connect with Aftab and I on LinkedIn and send your thoughts to our executive producer, James from Sweetfish. You can email him at james@sweetfishmedia.com. Your feedback will help us make season 3 even better.
and remember, security fuels innovation, complexity is the enemy, and collaboration is the way. Until season 3.